born on July 9th, 1947 in Potrero Hill, California. That's a project, not a suburb of San Francisco, California. Was born O.J. the Jew Simpson. From birth, O.J. developed rickets, which is a degenerative disease that causes bow-leggedness, to which he had to wear braces until the age of 5, which coincidentally was the same year his father left him and his 3 younger siblings and his mom. And on a side note, his father ended up becoming one of the biggest drag queens on the entire West Coast during his prime. OJ had a troubled upbringing. He got into many fights and many disagreements. He ended up joining the Persian Warrior Street Gang as a teen and had 3 separate stints in a juvenile detention center in San Francisco. It was there during his youth that he met the baseball superstar, San Francisco Giants superstar, Willie Mays, who encouraged OJ, hey man, you have the talent. You have the talent to get your mom out the hood and to change your life, show them something they never seen, change your ways. It was safe to say it took some time for OJ obliged. During his high school years, OJ ended up attending what is now the Galileo High School of Science and Technology. There, OJ was an all-city selection for football, track, and basketball, and he also lettered in all 3 of those sports. Due to his prolific career, he ended up getting his jersey number 32 retired at Galileo High School. But due to poor grades from poor focus and him just relying on his athletic ability, he received no scholarship offers out of high school. OJ had two choices coming out of his high school career. The first one was going to the Army. OJ graduated in 1965. He was communicating with a friend, saw him, spoke with him, and noticed his limbs were missing. That came from being a part of the Vietnam War during that time. It's what ultimately made OJ not consider at that point going to the Army at all. So he changed his mind and enrolled that year, 1965, at the City College of San Francisco. Another thing that happened in that year was OJ ended up marrying his high school sweetheart, Margaret Whitney, who was the eventual mother of his 3 eldest children. In 2 years at the JUCO level, OJ Simpson was a superstar. He rushed for 2,552 yards and 54 touchdowns, an average of 1,276 yards and 27 touchdowns per season. He was a JUCO All-American in both seasons. If any of you guys are JUCO fanatics, reach out to me. JUCO, for whatever reason, won't let us see the all-time leaderboards. So let me know where OJ Simpson ranked, where your all-time JUCO players rank, and give at me. Y'all comment on the video. In 1967, OJ had every college in the country reaching out to him, trying to get him on scholarship. His decision-making process was mainly centered around being close to his family, including his wife and his young children. So in 1967, OJ chose to stay local relatively and attend the University of Southern California. Before he had his exploits on the football field, OJ excelled for the USC track team. Joining him in 1967, he ended up placing 6th in the 100-meter national championships, but his 4x40 relay team is an all-time great track team. They set a world record destroying 38.6, beating second-place Tennessee by over 15 yards. It was said by the time OJ got the baton, he only heard his footsteps around him. USC ended up winning the track and field national championship in 1967, OJ's inaugural season, and then the very next year in 1968. Most of what OJ known for at USC is from his exploits on the football field, though. In 1967, after his track season, OJ ended up rushing for 1,543 yards, which led the nation, 13 touchdowns on 5.3 yards per carry. He also caught 10 passes for 109 yards. He won the Walter Camp Award, was a unanimous All-American, came in second in Heisman Trophy voting. More importantly, USC went 10-1, winning the Pac-8 championship and the national championship. For all my college football heads, I know it's weird hearing Pac-8 championship. We know realignment been started a long time ago. As we know, Pac-8 turned into the Pac-12, which is now the Pac-2. In 1968, OJ rushed for 1,709 yards, which ends up leading the nation again. He had 22 touchdowns on 4.9 yards per carry and an NCAA record 334 carries. He was a unanimous All-American, Walter Camp Award winner, Maxwell Award winner, and Heisman Trophy winner by the largest margin ever. That margin actually stood for 54 years. USC finished second in the polls after a last-minute loss to Ohio State in the national championship, but they did end up winning another conference championship, again in the Pac-8. OJ also began acting at USC. We know there's a lot of Hollywood influence there, even during those times. It was actually him beginning those acting chops they used as leverage in the coming 1969 NFL draft. See, in 1969, the number one overall pick was owned by the Buffalo Bills. The Bills were starved for the talent and branding opportunity of the consensus best player in the draft, OJ the Juice Simpson. Especially after the previous season, they went 1-12-1. Now, how OJ used that leverage? OJ threatened to quit football if he wasn't signed to the biggest contract in professional sports history during that time period, which ended up being 5 years, $650,000 per year. If owner Ralph Wilson didn't give him that contract, OJ Simpson planned to go on to have an acting career. But the thing about it was, a lot of these times athletes aren't serious, but OJ was incredibly serious at this point, as we see later on with some of his branding opportunities. Now, I broke down the Buffalo Bills saga, or time period OJ was with them, into eras. The first one was the John Rauch eras, who was the first coach. In 1969, the Buffalo Bills had John Rauch coming off an AFL Conference champion game appearance from the Oakland Raiders. OJ and John Rauch had immediate tension between each other, as OJ had massive success in the I formation style at USC, but John wanted OJ to diversify as a running back to include blocking and receiving from the backfield, things he had coached to high success of the Oakland Raiders. OJ viewed some of Rauch's coaching as far as blocking and receiving as punishment. After a 3-year record of 7-20-1, John Rauch resigned from a disagreement with owner Ralph Wilson, the owner of the Buffalo Bills. The next era was the Harvey Johnson era. There, after averaging 622 yards, 4 touchdowns on 210 carries a season under John Rauch, OJ was being looked at as the best looked at as a potential bust, actually, in the NFL draft at that time, after 3 years. In 1971, the Bills rehired Harvey Johnson as head coach after firing him years prior from going 1-10-1 in 1968. In 1971, the Bills went 1-13. This is before the Browns were bad. You got to remember, during this time, the Browns were actually pretty decent. But OJ had his best season yet, rushing for 742 yards and 5 touchdowns. After that 1-13 season, Harvey Johnson was reassigned to the scouting department. And a little tidbit on that is, again, he was already fired years prior, before OJ got there, for having a terrible record. He gets there, has a 1-13 season, gets reassigned to the scouting department. I don't know what that's saying, and I'm not going to put it out there, but there are rumors that him and Ralph Wilson, the owner at the time of the Buffalo Bills, had a great friendship around their shared passion for horse racing, and I'm going to leave it at that. After Harvey Johnson, there was the best era for O.J. Simpson as a player in the NFL, the Lou Saban era. In 1972, the Buffalo Bills hired Lou Saban, and unlike his predecessor, his vision was to design an entire offense around the former number 1 overall pick, O.J. the Juice Simpson. O.J. led the league in rushing with 1,251 yards and 6 touchdowns. The very next year, he set numerous NFL records. He was the first player to rush for over 2,000 yards in only a 14-game season, to which he had 2,003 yards. His 2,003 yards were the most in NFL history in a season, beating out the previous record holder, Jim Brown's record of 1,813 by nearly 200 yards. And he set the still standing rushing yards per game record, 143 yards. Imagine going to a game and you know you got a reliable back that's going to get you nearly 150. Nearly 150. His effort that year led him to his first and only playoff appearance of his career, which he lost the game. But he was the NFL Offensive Player of the Year and the NFL MVP of that season, the first in Buffalo history. From 1972 to 1976, OJ was a pure superstar. He averaged 1,500 yards, 9 touchdowns on 305 carries, and was generally regarded as the best running back in the NFL. He was a great back to come right after the Jim Brown era as the consensus best player / running back in the league. In my opinion, the best season of his career came in 1975. That year, he rushed for 1,817 yards, 16 touchdowns on 5.5 yards per carry on 329 attempts. In addition, he had 28 receptions for 426 yards and 7 touchdowns. That means he averaged 160 all-purpose yards and 1.5 touchdowns a game. Essentially the Super Saiyan version of Austin Eckler's, if you may. Obviously, fantasy football would have been great back then, and OJ would have been the number 1 pick in everyone's draft during that time. Finally, let's talk about his last years in the NFL and his eventual trade. From 1977 through 1979, OJ's production began to decline from injuries and as retirement loomed in his mind. In 1977, it was his last year in Buffalo. He rushed for 557 yards and 0 touchdowns, the first and only time he did that in his career, had 0 touchdowns in the season, on 126 carries after only playing in 7 games that year. In 1978, OJ had reportedly become frustrated with the Buffalo Bills over their lack of playoff appearances and a strong desire to return to the West Coast. He even threatened to retire in 1976 if he was not traded to the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams offered all 12 of their picks in the 1977 NFL draft. Buffalo declined. They then signed OJ to a 3-year, $2,250,000 deal. I repeat, a 3-year, $2,250,000 deal, which is obviously big at that time, and especially for a running back, a declining one at that. But OJ ended up getting a wish as far as the trade to the West Coast. Even better, he went to his hometown, San Francisco 49ers. The Bills ultimately decided on a rebuild and traded the juice to his hometown team in 1978. San Francisco received O.J. the Juice Simpson, while Buffalo received 5 draft picks over a 3-year period, which included in 1978 the number 38 overall pick, a second rounder, a third rounder at number 65 overall, a first round pick, and a fourth rounder, which ended up being the first overall pick and number 83 overall pick in 1979. And finally, a second rounder in 1980, which was number 29 overall. Joe Cribbs was the only Pro Bowler out of those 5 picks. He ended up going in the 1980 draft, and he was a Pro Bowler for 3 of his first 4 years in the NFL. And he was a running back. I like to include the number 1 overall pick in 1979. His name was Tom. I can't recall his last name. Y'all get in the comments and let me know his last name. I believe it was Italian. I like to bring him up because he ended up actually choosing the CFL over the NFL. Think about that now. A player choosing the Arena Football League, CFL or USFL over the NFL, because at that time he felt like there was greater financial security in the CFL. It's incredible to think about. Unfortunately, OJ dealt with injuries and a lack of playoff appearances in his final 2 years in the NFL with San Francisco. He only rushed for 1,053 yards, 4 touchdowns on 281 carries, which is a 3.7 yard per carry average his last 2 years combined in the NFL. OJ ended up retiring with the second most rushing yards in NFL history with 11,236. He ended up scoring 61 touchdowns on the ground on 2,404 attempts. Generally regarded as the second best running back at the time of his retirement, OJ was a Pro Bowler, an All-Pro, NFL Offensive Player of the Year, Heisman Trophy winner, NFL MVP, Hall of Famer, and he's generally regarded as being in the upper room of that Hall of Fame as a top 10 running back in NFL history. After his career, OJ got into many adventures, whether that be acting, broadcasting, and corrections. But we won't get into all that. If y'all enjoyed the video, like and subscribe to the channel. 32 of Any Podcast. OJ, the Juice Simpson.